The bunker in the pines. Ethan always said he'd been born in the wrong era. Give him 1987 and a flea market camcorder, and he would have been king of the dead mall sneaking past plywood barricades, panning slowly across shuttered food courts, whispering into the mic like a kid reporter on the edge of history. Instead, he got now an endless scroll of filters and takes and trends, where even good things burned out in a week and everyone pretended not to notice the ache that came after. The one thing that still felt solid was the old world hidden under the new, places that had been built to last and then abandoned anyway. If you stepped inside them, you could still hear the hum. He had a partner for that hum, Mason. The rumor came from a local subreddit filled with people who thought they were the first ones to discover trespassing. A thread about weird Cold War stuff near the river had a comment from a user whose account history was all ham radio talk. The comment said a prominent local figure built a residential bunker after the Cuban Missile Crisis and then vanished into opportunity. Half the replies were jokes. The other half were maps of half-remembered woods. Ethan didn't bite at rumors, but he did bite at a clue. He spent a rainy Thursday at the library nursing a foam cup of coffee and squinting at microfilm. Most of what he found was Civic boosters ribbon cuttings and 4-H winners. But then the frame slid to a page from October 1961. And there it was, a headline in blaring capitals: "Local businessman builds family shelter amid crisis." The story was tame, but it mentioned a property line. A shipment of concrete so large the plant had to operate overnight. And buried in the columna, grainy photograph with faint, hand-drawn lines like a blueprint. Ethan took a phone pic and cross-referenced satellite imagery. A rectangular scar in the pines. A slumped roofline almost melted into moss. A suggestion of geometry where there shouldn't be any. That night, at Mason's kitchen table, pizza grease soaking through a paper plate, Ethan laid everything out like a detective. Or it's a root cellar built by a guy who listened to the wrong radio show, Mason said. But Ethan saw the flicker. It was the same look Mason got when he spotted a door the demolition crew hadn't quite nailed shut. Worst case, Ethan said, tapping the blueprint photo. We get muddy and you complain about my life choices for a week. Best case, we document something no one has seen in 60 years. Mason sighed, then grinned. You had me at complain. They drove the next morning under a sky like wet slate. The Subaru's speakers turned every song into a garage recording, which somehow made the old stuff sound truer. They screamed the choruses anyway. When the GPS chimed and told them to turn onto a narrow county road, the world went quiet as if the car had rolled under a bell jar. Pines Preston. Palmetto fronds scratched the undercarriage. They pulled onto a gravel turnout that looked like hunters used it twice a year and no one else ever did. Last chance, Mason said, teasing but not really. Backups for the backups, Ethan said, patting his pack. Rule 3? Mason bumped his shoulder to Ethan's. Don't lose you. I know. The trail into the trees wasn't a trail so much as a place where fewer things grew. The forest smelled like damp earth and sap. At some point the air temperature dropped a few degrees, and the light thinned until it felt like walking inside a dim chapel. When the house finally revealed itself, it did it the way a deer does, be already being there when you realize it exists. The roof sagged toward the middle. Shingles had slid down and lay scattered like a jaw's worth of bad teeth. Moss climbed the clapboards. A porch slumped with a wet sigh. They circled it. Ethan scanned like a surveyor. Mason prodded with a busted broom handle he'd found beside the foundation. Around back, in a shallow drift of last year's leaves, Ethan's boot hit something not earth, and the echo came back from below. He dug. The leaf mud peeled away, revealing the outline of a metal hatch. Rust had eaten it into a burnt orange scab. Mason disappeared and came back, cradling a rock the size of a small watermelon. Nobody tell my chiropractor. The first impact made a sound like hitting a gong underwater. The second peeled a hinge. On the fourth, the hatch gave with a shriek that wasn't quite metallic. Cold air breathed out rot. Rust. Old ammonia. A concrete stairwell sank into a darkness so complete that Ethan's headlamp beam looked weak. Ladies first, Mason said, But his face had gone serious the way it always did when the line between fun and danger came within reach. Ethan led. The concrete was slick. Water ticked somewhere below, a sound that felt too loud for the space. The stairwell walls sweated. The lime bloom on the concrete glowed when their beams caught it. At the bottom, a short corridor like a gullet. A metal door feathered with rust at the edges. Ethan put a shoulder into it. The shriek this time was all metal. The door gave a foot, then more. Beyond it, a room shaped like a kitchen you could live in forever if you had to and didn't mind the mold. The kitchen had been built by someone who believed in order. A long table dominated the center, its legs swollen with moisture. Cabinet doors hung, furred in mildew. Rust split, cans had bled their labels into brown smears. A chipped mug sat by the sink filled with a skin of black water, as if waiting for a hand that never returned. They moved slow, beams panning, lens caps off, shutters timid. Silence sat on their shoulders like a weight. The bathroom had a mirror where a film of black mold bloomed like frost. The toilet held algae the color of sick jade. A storeroom's shelves bowed under jars that had become their own organisms. In the corner, another stairway. Narrow, descending farther than logic suggested the hill could go. Blueprint didn't show this, Ethan said, which came out thinner than he intended. Maybe they added on. Mason tried, then didn't believe his own joke. The last door opened onto a sleeping area for metal frames. No mattresses left. Only melted fabric and coils like rib cages. On the concrete between the first two frames sat a child's shoe. Tiny, cracked across the toe. It pointed toward the wall as if its last wearer had turned to run and vanished. Mason took a photo and then another, then lowered the camera because some rooms don't want to be captured. Back in the storeroom, they stood over the narrow stairwell like men look at a river in flood. Ethan felt a chill that wasn't air. He tugged at the strap of his headlamp. Rule 3, he said. Mason reached out. They touched hands without making a thing of it. Together, Mason said, "We go down. We go back up. If it gets weird, we get out." Agreed? Agreed. They went down. The concrete ended after only a dozen steps and became rock. Not bedrock, but something hacked from the earth by hands that were in a hurry and then in despair. The walls were bite-marked by shovels and pickaxes. Somewhere above them, water found cracks and bled down in thin, greasy lines that smelled faintly chemicalous sting at the back of the throat. The ghost of a cleaning solution. Iodine. Something from a lab. The tunnels forked, then forked again. Supports had been jammed into place and were warping, the grain twisting like a painful wrist. Ethan felt the old rule thrum in his bones. Don't lose each other. He kept Mason in the corner of his beam like he would keep the edge of a cliff. He kept touching the wall with his left hand. A breadcrumb trail of skin oil he knew was false comfort. They passed rooms that weren't rooms, but hollows. In one, a mattress had sunk until the earth had swallowed it almost whole. A single metal spring protruded like a plant that had learned to hate the sun. In another, crates had softened into shapelessness. Their stenciled words surrendered to mold. Scratches began to appear on the walls. Some were fingernails' work. Some were knife tips. Some were just frantic marks. Others formed words. But in the wavering light, nothing stayed readable for long except 3 sentences repeated enough times to sink. In a way out. It waits. Turn back. Bad graffiti. Mason muttered. The joke died without making it past his teeth. They found a table in a chamber the size of a small living room. The table had a patina of dust so thick their beams seemed to swim. Papers lay scattered, delicate as onion skin. Ethan blew gently, and one lifted to reveal a handwritten inventory. Everything on the list had a struck-through line as if the act of eating was the same as erasing. On the floor beside the table lay a suitcase with metal latches corroded into green crust. Inside, shirts rotted to gauze, a Bible that had swollen into a misshapen brick, and a handful of Polaroids. The faces had blurred not with age, but with intent fingers or something sharper had rubbed them until they were fog. Ethan's lamp hit a bank of dented metal lockers. He pulled one. It stuck, then hissed open. Inside hung a coat decaying from the shoulders down. In its pocket lay a cracked leather billfold. He opened it to a brittle ID card. Dr. Raymond Cavalier beside a typed slogan in tiny letters. If found, please help my family. The air turned colder. Not a little. Their breath came out in ghosts. A sound behind them, one metallic knock. They spun in the same direction the way trained movers mirror each other. The tunnel past the chamber held nothing. The silence afterward wasn't silence anymore. It had a fabric to it. It had threads you could almost pluck. Ethan, Mason whispered. Except they were 2 feet apart. Do you see? At the end of the corridor, just beyond what their headlamps could claim, something leaned into view. It was the size of a person but thinner, as if it had been pressed by great weight and then told to stand up. Its outline shuddered the way hot air on asphalt shimmers. Inside the shimmer, light pooled, a pale, icy hue that was not a reflection, not phosphorescence, only itself. Its head tilted the way a dog tilts when it hears a sound it can't assign. Where I should have been. The light thickened, and the thickening pulsed. And Ethan's body reacted before his brain did. Ancient muscles cinched to stone. He yanked the camera up. The display whitened, then grayed. When his vision caught up, the thing had stepped sideways, calm as someone easing back behind a curtain. Not possible, Mason said. Not possible. Something far closer than the thing, something mundane crashed behind them. A shifting support. A dropped pebble amplified to a gunshot. They turned instinctively. And when they turned back, the corridors became all corridors. Rule 3, Ethan said. But what came out was Mason. Mason was gone. There was no scream. There was no stumble. There was the half-second between looking and not looking, and in that half-second the tunnel replaced his friend with darkness and a damp draft that felt like breath. Ethan's light whipped madly from wall to wall. The wall texture became a language he couldn't read. Handprints appeared everywhere and nowhere. Mason, he shouted. The sound bounced back and arrived as Mason, Mason, Mason in different pitches until it sounded like someone else calling him from 3 different distances. He chose a path because paralysis is a choice too. He moved. The air grew thinner. His head began to throb with a foggy ache. The smell sharpened into the ozone bite you taste when you stand too close to a failing transformer. His lamp pulsed to red on the battery indicator. He swapped to the backup by feel and felt the sick relief of even a weak beam when the alternative is none. He found a narrow annex crammed with jars. The liquid inside had gone the color of weak tea. In the suspension floated shapes the human eye doesn't want. Hair, bones, knots of something like muscle. One jar held a tag. Specimen 12 recovered 1965. Another shelf of jars held nothing but cloudy solution and the memory of what had been there. He backed out so fast he bumped a door on a single rusty hinge. It swung and revealed a room with rows of cots. The mattresses were gone, replaced by piles of clothing. He thought they were clothing until he saw a white curve in the heap and then another, the small, delicate geometry of bones the size of a child's wrist. On the floor, a metal basin had a brown ring baked into it. He didn't vomit because the body limits how many processes you can run at once. He moved again. He whispered steadily because sometimes words can lash you to the world. I am Ethan. I am with Mason. I am getting out. The words weren't true yet, but they were a rope. In another bend of tunnel, he found a drawing on the wall that reached almost from floor to ceiling. Charcoal sketched a towering figure with eyes like coins, its arms outstretched. A swarm of smaller figures crouched at its feet. Over everything, a crayon yellow ring smeared. A child's hand's work had been rubbed into a halo. When the cold came again, it came in a wave. The light knot has arrived with it. It pooled and thickened in the passage ahead until it went from suggestion to presence. The thing stood partway into the corridor like a man easing into a crowded room. Its head tipped as if recognizing him. It smiled. The mouth was small, and the teeth were shards of something that had never been whole. Ethan ran. The tunnels doubled and tripled on him like a bad card trick. His breath tore ragged holes in the air. Somewhere behind him, the light bled around corners faster than light should move. The sound the thing made wasn't footsteps. It was a wet drag and a hushed hiss. A whisper sped up to insect pitch. It didn't rush him. It kept a distance as if it wanted him to tire. Ethan rounded a turn and slammed to a stop. The beam of his flashlight caught metal, a shovel head broken clean off and half buried in tumble. Beyond it, under a slide of loose brick and earth, his hands found a hard curve. He dug with the urgency of a man pulling a child from under ice. Dirt gave. A spiral of stairs appeared, stone worn smooth in the middle by feet long gone. Above the spiral, the air felt less dead. It had a thread in it. Pine. Unbelievable pine. He wedged himself into the first coil and dragged upward, elbows screaming. The blue-white thick glow ballooned below until it seemed to fill the world. The thing came faster now that it had a funnel. The stone skinned his knees. He grabbed blindly and his hand closed around a chunk of concrete that had spalled from the stairwell when the earth moved years ago. It was too heavy. He lifted it anyway because he had to. The thing's Hondiff hand was the word clamped around his ankle for a fraction of a second. It was cold. Not like ice, but like an old freezer you open after it dies. A cold that smells like meat. He kicked and felt his foot slide. In a single, roaring motion, he hurled the concrete downward. The sound that came back from the impact was wrong. It was the wet crack of something that shouldn't be brittle. And then another sound like an electrical arc unspooling into a scream. The light blew out. Darkness came back in a slap. And with it a smell of scorched copper and old bleach. Ethan didn't wait for a miracle or a second act. He clawed upward until the spiral opened into a vertical shaft so choked with roots it looked like an old mouth full of hair. He pushed through, shoulders tearing as if he were being born. And then the world widened around him with star-pricked sky and air so clean he staggered. He lay on the forest floor and sobbed once. A sound he didn't recognize. Star-shaped swam. His lamp gave one final pulse and died. Night pressed close, complicated by wind and insects and the distant hiss of traffic he might have imagined. He stood and turned, trying to get a bearing from the sky, and realized he was nowhere near the house. The bunker had exhaled him a mile from where it inhaled him. "Mason," he said, and now that there was room for the thought, his body made it into a shout. The woods answered with a thin, far-off keening. It rose along a line that cut through bone. At first it was his name. He knew it. Then the sound twisted itself, becoming something with harmonics people shouldn't make. Then flattened into a long, angry breath that lasted too long. It faded. The pines resumed being pines. Ethan did what humans do. He turned away from the hole, from the idea of the hole, and moved toward road and light and help. He did not look back. He followed the faint slope that suggested drainage, and then the memory of the car, and then the shape of gravel. When he hit the Subaru's hood with his thighs, he gasped like a diver hitting air. He drove. He didn't remember driving. He only remembered the parking lot lights of the sheriff's substation turning the night into milk and making him shake so hard he couldn't get the gear shift into park. Morning is cruel when you have to dress an emergency and paperwork. Statements were taken. Officers with graying hair who had heard everything before learned they hadn't. Ethan's account sounded worse when he said it to people wearing badges. He watched their faces do the professional blank and then crack. The old deputy with the nicotine fingers asked him twice to slow down. The young one asked for the hatch coordinates and pretended his hand didn't shake. They formed a search, sheriff's deputies, 2 fire rescue units, a state environmental guy because of the chemical smell Ethan mentioned, and by mid-afternoon a white truck with no logo that produced 2 men in plain clothes who wore the kind of boots you buy with government money. They did not file into the woods first. They watched the ones who did. Ethan went too. He wasn't allowed to descend. But he stood at the rim of the hatch while a rope team went down and called progress. The voices from below quieted when the air changed. Someone coughed dryly and swore softly over the open line. "Smells like the inside of a hospital mop closet that never got cleaned." Someone else said, "Hold that, what is what am I looking at?" They found the kitchen, the bathroom, the storeroom. They found the narrow stair. A medic cursed low and said, "We need respirators for the lower levels." They found the chamber with the table and the inventory. They found the Polaroids. They stopped the chatter after that and spoke like men who had just remembered they were inside a place that preferred whispers. They did not find Mason that day. They did find bones small. Not all human. They cataloged, bagged, lowered themselves farther with better masks. At some point, a deputy surfaced and vomited neatly into the leaves. When Ethan moved toward him, the plainclothes younger man stepped in with a palm-out guard gesture he made look casual. The older plainclothes man put a hand on Ethan's shoulder as if they knew each other and said, gentle but immovable, "We are going to proceed methodically." By sunset, they called it. Posted perimeter tape around a part of the forest that didn't understand it, and left one cruiser to sit dumb and flashing while the night pressed against it. Ethan slept like a machine that had been turned off. He woke in a blank room at his father's old house because that was the address he set out of habit. His phone showed 9 missed calls from numbers he didn't know. He sat up because people do. The second day brought hazmat suits. A white canopy snapped into place over the hatch like a magician's cloth. The men in non-logo boots now had clipboards. A woman with an accent measured and took samples and spoke in terms that were precise but not helpful. The sheriff stood to the side and developed a habit of removing his hat and pinching the bridge of his nose. Near noon, a shout came up. It wasn't the right kind of shout. It wasn't "we found him," and it wasn't grief. It was the shout of a discovered fact. They had found the spiral. By mid-afternoon, they had widened the roots enough to send a man up from below rather than down from above. He emerged into light that made his pupils pin. He said, to no one and everyone, "There's a second exit a ways north. It's collapsed 3/4. We relieved the pressure, but it's not safe." He took a breath. There's a body lodged in the debris above the lowest turn. It's been there some time. Not decades. Months. Maybe. Could be longer. It's wedged. We'll need. Ethan felt his blood leave his hands. Clothing? The older plainclothes man asked. Jeans. Boots. Flannel. Backpack straps. Wallet in the back pocket. But it's impacted. Won't be intact. They didn't let Ethan go down. They didn't let him go anywhere. But when they brought the black bag up, everything slowed in a way that felt almost kind. Ethan saw the shape under the plastic as an outline, not a person. And in that outline, he could imagine 1,000 people and none. The sheriff stood with his hat at his chest. The young deputy stared at his boots. The woman with the accent looked past Ethan at the trees. The medical examiner brought in from the city said he'd need time and dignity. He took both. By dusk, he could say this much: the fractures were consistent with a fall and a compression event. There were scrapes across the skull that could have been from stone. There were ligature-like marks at the ankle and calf that could have been from an object like a hand, but weren't. He didn't say more while the pines listened. Was he alone? Ethan asked no one specific. They didn't answer right away. When the answer did arrive, it came sideways. The environmental specialist explained that a mist of reactive chemicals was present below chloramines. Perhaps, or the byproducts of old bleach and ammonia interacting in a slow, cold reaction with organics. The odor of ozone might indicate electrical breakdown. The literature says exposure can cause confusion, even hallucinations. Your description of a glow, she said, carefully analytical, could be confounded by those conditions. Certain fungi also luminesce. Foxfire. It could appear to move if your light source moved. Ethan said nothing. He had thrown a piece of concrete and heard a skull break in a way that didn't sound like stone. The mark on his ankle, hidden by his sock, had not been caused by falling rock. It was purpled in the shape of fingers that didn't fit. He chose not to show it because some truths turn into rumors the moment you hand them over. On the third day, they expanded the grid and found what the inventory had promised: the bones of at least 6 individuals beyond those small, mixed ones. A cluster near the cot room, another near the jars, a scattering in an annex where the ceiling had dropped. They found a second wallet, leather melted to the content. It cradled an ID card for Dr. Raymond Keller, the same name as the inventory. Tucked behind the ID, a palm-sized photo of a family in front of a ranch house that looked like the ruined one. Everyone's faces crisp, untouched by malice or time. They found drawings. They took them down carefully and slid them into plastic. One drawing carried the same figure with the smudged yellow head, but now ringed in a halo of black scribble strokes like a corona. At the bottom, in a child's letters, "It eats light. Daddy says don't look." The older plainclothes man studied that one longer than the others. By the end of the week, the white canopy came down. The perimeter tape went slack and drooped. The sheriff gave a statement that was human, which is rarer than you think. He said a Cold War relic had become a tomb, and then a crime scene, and then a place for the dead to tell the living what they could. He did not mention anything that glowed. The plainclothes men arranged for certain items to go to a facility for analysis. The county promised a marker eventually, and sometimes counties keep their promises. Ethan waited for the part where someone tells him how to live with it. That part did not arrive. He slept badly, and then, strangely, well, grief rearranged the room by increments. A month later, when the legal things had been said and the practical things had been completed badly and then better, Ethan went back to the Pines with permission and a deputy's escort who stayed at the gravel turnout and smoked. Ethan didn't go to the hatch. He went to the second exit because people go to the places where the missing parts of their story might be. The shaft mouth had been boarded for safety. Wildman had tried to claim the disturbed dirt. He stood there long enough to feel the day cool. He spoke aloud the way people do at graves. "Mason," he said, and then didn't add the part about Rule 3 because rules are a kind of hope, and they had done their job right up until they couldn't. The last light slipped sideways. The pines lifted and settled in the wind like something breathing. He felt it then. Not a presence. Not anything supernatural. Only the math of cause and consequence. A rich man's fear became concrete. A bunker became a maze. A maze became a trap. A trap waited until the living stumbled into it. Violence didn't need a monster. It only needed time and walls. He was almost ready to leave when he saw the glint. Not light. Metal. Half under the duff. 15 feet from the shaft. A camera lay sleeping. He crouched. Mud fingerprinted the grip. The screen was spiderwebbed, but not dead. When he pressed the power, a ghost bar of battery flickered. One video file registered, last_004. MP4. He didn't watch it there. Back home. He charged it, then plugged the card into his laptop. He put a hand on either side of the keyboard and breathed a few times like a swim coach had told him once to do before the relay. Then he clicked. The video opened to a jerked frame of a tunnel wall. Mason's voice filled the speakers, hoarse and thin with distance. "Ethan, you still with me? Okay. I'm keeping this on. If you can hear me, clap. Man. Clap. Clap." He clapped. The echo made it sound like someone else obliged. He laughed once. An insane shard of normal. "I'm up a slope. There's fresh air. Swear to God. I'm coming back down after I check." The camera swung. Found a hollow. Then a narrow turn. The light in the edge of the frame trembled, not the camera's light. It thickened. Mason stopped breathing for a second and then resumed twice as fast. "Okay," he said, and he sounded like a man choosing the line he will say on the news. "Okay. If this gets dumb, I am." The frame blew white. A smear of blue-white flare filled it, and then pulled back as if embarrassed to be seen. It moved wrong, not on legs, but like a jelly in water, pushing with invisible forces. The sound that came with it was the whisper hiss from the stairwell. Mason did what men do when two rules contradict. He ran forward because going back wasn't there. The camera jounced. He shouted, "Ethan." And then, a second later, "I'm fine. I'm fine." He was not fine. The beam chopped and picked out the spiral stair. "Got you." He panted. "Got you." Got. The world became stone and speed. The camera yanked down as his foot snagged. The angle shifted to show his boot sliding backward in the grip of something that looked like pale fog with fingers. He screamed then. Not the scream of a man burning or drowning. The scream of a man who knows a rule has broken and can never be mended. In the frame's final intact image, his hand shot into view, grabbing a chunk of concrete. He threw. The video clipped to static and then, for one heartbeat, showed a burst of black threaded with lightning, as if circuitry inside flesh had failed. The last sound was not the wet crack Ethan remembered. It was a smaller, meaner sound, the sound metal makes when it realizes it has rusted through at the hinge. The file ended. Ethan sat with his palms on the table as if holding it down against wind. He wanted, wildly, for the footage to be a lie. But lies leave handprints in a different way. This one left a bruise where the fingers did not fit a man's hand. He sent the file to the sheriff with a note to do whatever the law required. He printed 3 stills and put them in a manila folder he labeled with a date and tucked into the back of a filing cabinet. A place where things become both safe and forgotten. Then he opened a new document in a blank window. He had always told himself he went into dead places because the living ones had too much noise. That was only part of it. The other part was that dead places tell the truth if you listen long enough. In them, you can hear which decisions congealed into concrete and which people were ground between those decisions until the record no longer remembered to say their names. He wrote the story you just heard. He kept the names you don't know. He changed the ones you do. Because a story can carry a weight a report can't. He told the truth. And when he got to the part where it would be tempting to leave the end open because it feels more haunting, he didn't. He told you plainly. They found Mason. He died trying to climb to air. He died because a maze designed for fear kept doing its job after the fear that paid for it was gone. Something else lived down there long enough to learn new rules. Or maybe the chemicals and wires and darkness learned to pretend to be a thing. He killed it. And he will never know if it was the only one. After you hear a story like that, people want you to say what it means. Here is what it means. If you bury fear under concrete, it doesn't become safety. It becomes a place. Ethan goes to the marker they finally put up. It's a simple plaque on a stone. The names they could confirm etched shallow and level. Raymond Keller. His wife. 2 children whose ages they can only guess. And an inscription that asks mercy for the unknown and the unclaimed. He stands there until the mosquitoes find him. He stands there a little longer after that. On the drive home, a thunderhead the size of a county builds in the western sky and goes black at the belly. He doesn't urbex the way he did. He still loves the hum. But he is careful now about what he wakes. He still carries a camera. He still carries a backup for the backup. When he tells the story, he does not ask anyone to believe him because belief is cheap. He asks for something harder, attention. He ends by saying what I'm about to say to you. If this story pulled you in, tell me why. In the comments, take a stand on what we owe each other when fear, power, and secrecy collide. The bunker under the pines didn't build itself. Decisions did fund it, justified, and left unaccountable. Do you think the thing Ethan fought was a product of chemicals and confinement? Or do you believe some violences become their own presence? Where do you draw the line between self-defense and harm? Between preparedness and paranoia? Between justice and cruelty? Be specific. Be brave. Say what you believe about violence and injustice. Not in abstractions, but in how it shows up in your neighborhood, your workplace, your family stories. And if you've got a different read on what was waiting in those tunnels, lay it out. I'll read every word.